Today we have two speakers. The first one is Greg Paige, followed by a short 15-minute talk by NCSU student Kaleb Goff. I'll introduce Greg first, and then we'll continue with Kaleb without a break. Our first speaker is Greg Paige, who's Director of Horticulture here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. He has had a 30-year career in public gardening, including such renowned gardens as the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, the Holden Arboretum in Ohio, the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, and prior to that, prior to coming here, he was at the Bartlett lab in Charlotte. His career in public horticulture, of course, has taken him on many collecting trips with colleagues, and that's what he's here today to talk about. The title of his talk is The Pleasures, Perils, and Pain of Plant Hunting Near and Far. Please welcome Greg Paige.
Good morning, y'all. Everybody can hear me? We good? I was told I have 60 very precious minutes to talk. I'm going to set a timer because I have had lots of coffee this morning, and I told Blake this could potentially be a 3-hour tour, but I'm going to try to keep it to 60. We'll see how it goes. As Bobby mentioned, I've been doing this for quite a while. I've been very lucky to work at some amazing places and with some amazing people. And I've always liked to spend time outdoors, as you would if you pick a career in horticulture, but there's something really special about getting to do collecting trips, and really got involved in that my last 5 to 10 years when I was at Bartlett. And I've done some stuff here and hope to continue that, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So the first question that we always get asked is why? What are you doing? What's the purpose of that? And it's kind of multifaceted. There's always that potential to find some new plants, things that might make good landscape plants for our gardens. The other big important thing, particularly when I was at Bartlett, was to increase the diversity of stuff we had in our collections. So we were looking for wild collected plants. That was an important component of building the Arboretum and adding things to it. And the other part of that, the magic ingredient, and I'll talk a lot about that today, is plant conservation, is preserving those plants, collecting them. And you don't hear a lot about plant conservation because it's not quite as sexy as animal conservation. Some of the oaks that are endangered, magnolias and things like that, aren't as pretty and cute as something like a Siberian tiger. But plants are much more threatened than animal species are. And this is a statistic from the IUCN, and you see that 40% of assessed plants are on the red list. The red list is an organization that does a lot of research to determine whether plants are endangered, threatened, or on the verge of extinction in the wild. And that's a pretty high percentage, 40%. And in our shrinking landscapes and wild spaces, that's on a tangent to continue. And it's an important component of botanical gardens and arboreta to kind of champion and help preserve plants. So this is kind of the fabric and the definition of plant conservation in public horticulture. The most important thing is to increase awareness, to teach people about it, to talk about it, the importance of it. The second is to share the information that you get with other colleagues that are doing kind of the same thing, and other organizations that may help with funding for that. Support and potential reintroduction of wild populations and habitat restoration and management. So when I was at Bartlett, we had 300 plus acres. So I had room to kind of seed bank things. So we planted a lot of oak species that were endangered in hopes of collecting that germplasm and sharing that with other people. Long-term seed and tissue banking, sharing of that material, all the stuff that we grew in Charlotte were to be shared with other gardens and other arboreta and organizations that were trying to help with those sorts of things. And funding and resources to support all the above, and working with people to help continue that and help pay for that important process. I was a part of the American Public Garden Association. In all my previous careers, we do a lot of stuff with them here at the Raulston. There is a subgroup called the Plant Collection Network that helps with curatorial practice and to kind of certify plant collections. And we have two of those collections here, our red buds and our magnolias, our plant collection certified collections. And this organization helps kind of coordinate a nationwide approach to good curatorial practices, preserving plant germplasm, communicating, teaching, outreach, all that kind of stuff with gardens all across the country. And we continue to do that here at the Raulston. There are a couple of subgroups that work kind of in the same realm outside of the APGA. We in the plant world are bad with our acronyms. This is this group, the Plant Collection Collaborative, PCC, not to be confused with the PCN, was formed after several of us were on a collecting trip in Kentucky and crossed paths literally in a trail with colleagues from another garden. And it's like, we should talk to each other and help save resources and work together and let each other know that, you know, we might be doing some similar things. So this group was pulled together with a lot of other gardens in Arboretum. We're not a part of it here, but it's short term. Mark and I plan to join because it's a good way to help preserve and also get some plants here at the Arboretum. And this is a whole bunch of collaborators that we work with to do some of these efforts. The U.S. Forest Service is in a huge one. They realized about 10 years ago that they're not staffed and suited to do a lot of the collection work and came to the APGA and asked for help doing that and offered funding for that. The BGCI, Botanical Garden Conservation International, is another kind of subgroup. They work closely with conservation efforts, and they've done a lot of research. They've published a lot of things that kind of define and do that outreach and continue that education on plant conservation. Magnolia Society is a big supporter of the Oak Society, kind of typical things, USDA also. And where I kind of got my first taste of plant collecting was at the Holden Arboretum. I'm embarrassed to say it was over 30 years ago. There was a whole troop of folks in the horticulture garden there that did a lot of collection abroad and locally, and really kind of got my interest peaked in it there. When I worked at the Cincinnati Zoo, they had a plant conservation program, the Center for Reproduction of Endangered Wildlife, that you wouldn't think of a zoo working with plants, but the Cincinnati Zoo is very plant forward, and not only are they helping preserve animal species, but plant species as well. So those were kind of my first tastes of that, and kind of etched all through my horticulture career. I'm a big believer of giving credit where credit is due. I've been very lucky to work with some amazing people. The young gentleman on the ground taking pictures is Rick Lewandowski. He was at Mount Cuba when I was at the Scott Arboretum. Incredible plantsman, one of the best people I've ever worked with in the field, knows a lot of local people all throughout the Southeast, knows where to find rare and unusual things, and is just a lot of fun to travel with. That's Ozzie Johnson on the right, a good friend of ours that's down in Atlanta. He's done a lot of stuff internationally, in addition to being an amazing nurseryman and plantsman, and also an amazing brewer of a really good cup of coffee. Just had a big birthday recently. And when I was at Bartlett, I was lucky to bump into these two folks. Tony Kirkham at Kew, who's done an amazing amount of international plant exploration and plant conservation. My brain just went blank. Quarry Hill Botanic Garden. Bill McNamara, good Lord. Bill McNamara was a good friend of Mr. Bartlett, and he was actually the one that I give credit to helping us do wild collected, because on a trip to Charlotte, he's like, you don't have any wild collected stuff in your collection. And Mr. Bartlett turned to me and said, we don't have any wild collected stuff in our plant collection. So I give Bill a lot of credit for kind of getting us started and helping me kind of figure out that whole world. He was at the Quarry Hill Botanic Garden, which is now Sonoma Botanic Garden. And then there's these fellows. This was a talk here. Good Lord, I don't remember. Chris, you might know. It was quite a while ago. But that's Ozzy, Dan Hinckley, Scott McMahon. I don't know who that guy without gray hair is down the line there. That's Mark and Andrew Bunting down at the end. Andrew and I worked together at Scott, and Andrew's one of my oldest friends. Andrew has pushed me in a lot of directions, both good and bad, and I give him a lot of credit for getting me into the plant collection side of things. I did my first international trip with Mark, but the bulk of what I did with Andrew while he worked at Scott and Chicago Botanic Garden in Atlanta. So I'm a big believer in having plans. It makes life easier, and it gives you records and things to look back on. So anytime you're going to do one of these endeavors, you have to have a plan. And some of the basic things that are on that plan are, a wish list. What are you looking for? What do you want to target? Who are you going to go with? You need some collaborators. You can't do all that stuff yourself. It's going to cost a certain amount of money depending on where you're going. If it's local, it's not quite as bad as loading up on a plane and going to Vietnam or someplace like that. So funding is important. Where are you looking? Where are you going to target? And time and timing, both time and timing with most of the things you're going to collect, you're going to get seed from. So figuring out on the far side of the world when things are going to be ripe for seed, or the southeast or whatever. Very, very important. So on the left here, you see part of a plan that a colleague of mine kind of put together. And it's nice to kind of know what you're doing day to day. It kind of keeps you on task. But when you get back and you're kind of fuzzy as to what day you're at this national park or at this holler between the river and something else, you've got some records of that. And you're keeping records in the field, but it helps you kind of remember where you've been. And if you're going to go back the next year, you've got this to kind of build off of. Looking at maps, poring over herbarium specimens, looking for the target plants that you're finding is important. If you're doing international stuff, some of that planning might include some immunizations. I had a whole host of things I had to get poked into me before I went to Vietnam. Having a passport is crucial, if not impossible not to travel with, and being sure that it's up to date when you go. I've had colleagues that we had to abandon in the airport because their passport was expired. My friend Scott McMahon, a week before he was going to go on the trip with Vietnam, his dog chewed his passport up. So it's very important to keep that in a safe spot and up to date. So depending on international or local travel, there's a lot of good information out there for parts of the world that you're traveling in. This was a woody plant compendium of Kentucky and Tennessee. This was on a trip that I did with some folks going into Kentucky, and maps and things like that, just to kind of get a game plan before you get your feet on the ground. And I really like this part of traveling. I used to do a lot of backpacking, a lot of fast packing, and long distance running in the mountains. And I like that gear side of things, of getting things together and making sure you have all the right things that you're going to do in the field. So these are all things that you're doing and thinking about before you get that way. So having your ducks in a row is very important, both leading up to it and when you get to where you're going. And once you get to where you're going, your time is crucial. The proverbial clock is ticking. You need to make hay while the sun is shining, and make sure you're using your time very well. So a lot of times you're going someplace, you've got a plan, you may not have ever been there before. So you're scouting, you're looking for things. If you're lucky, you have GPS coordinates from other colleagues, from people local, or from herbarium specimens that you've looked at for your target species. So if you're lucky, you've got GPS coordinates, you go look, you find those plants, but you kind of look around that area for similar things and more of kind of the same species. This was a trip to Texas looking for Magnolia pyramidata, and we did a side trip where we had heard there were some other things that were on our target list, and just spent time kind of scouting around looking for stuff. But to the untrained eye, what are those guys doing walking around the woods, stomping around? What's going on there? And there is that initial scouting, looking for stuff. Down here in the corner, this is in Florida, looking for that light pink of the Magnolia pyramidata seed pods in an oasis sea of green, and trying to find that sort of thing. Hard to see, but a good testament to kind of what we're traveling in. This is me here. And down below me is Andrew, and I had a tree climbing line to throw a line into a tree that we would wrap around the seed pods, and I would snap them down on the ground, and he would catch them. But you had to be really quick because that ball has lead shot in it, and you had to be careful to catch the seed pod and dodge the lead shot that was shooting through the branches. So I kept Andrew on his toes, and he came home with all of his teeth attached, which is good. But that takes a lot of time to get back there, to find what you're looking for, to locate the seed and to get it on the ground. We brought climbing gear, and that helped to a degree, but it takes so much time. We were taking notes during that time frame. Things will show up when we're out in the middle of nowhere. These two German Shepherds came up to us on a trip in Kentucky, but we're taking notes. Everybody kind of has a job of what they're doing. This is my good friend Todd Roundsville at the National Arboretum, taking GPS coordinates, recording all that information. This is Andrew collecting some herbarium specimens, and this was on a scouting trip, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But everybody kind of has a job, so that we're taking the best use of our time and really finding what we're needing. A big important part of that is taking herbarium specimens for our records and for future records, and that continues all through the trip. And there's different ways to do that. The gentleman on the left is Kevin Conrad from National Arboretum. He's the absolute master at doing this and has one of the best systems. Instead of dragging all that stuff out in the field, we're labeling things, putting them in a bag, and when we get back to the vehicle, he whips it all together and gets those gathered and pressed and processed. But we're carrying that stuff with us everywhere we go. And if you're lucky, you stumble across what you're looking for. And it's funny, again, if the untrained eye saw us out in the field, we descend upon things like a bunch of monkeys, just grabbing all the fruit from trees and seed pods and whatever we can find, but things that are on our target list. I had a picture, but I couldn't find it. But we're staying in hotels. We got rent-a-cars, and we'd used this van to reach up high and had backed it into the woods. And Kevin was standing on top of it. I couldn't find the picture, and pulling these Dutchman pipe seed pods out of the trees. But it's a good day when you find things on your target list. This is the Magnolia pyramidata fruit on the left, and we spend a lot of time going to areas and not finding anything. And it was always a good day when we saw that pink up in the canopies of these trees, and we got them down to the ground, and they seemed to be viable. And as we're traveling along the way, it's nice to work with a lot of local folks and colleagues. A magnolia species in Vietnam on the left. This was close to the end of our trip, and literally just stumbled into this seed pod with those seeds getting ready to dehiss. It couldn't have been more perfect, and actually got to bring those back, and I think we have some of those growing here. Nyssa aquatica on the right, that was a big thing on our list. And again, on our very last day on a trip in Kentucky, we stumbled across quite a bit of that and actually got a lot of it to produce. So you've been out in the field all day long, you've driven all over God's green earth, and you get back to wherever you're staying, and that's when the fun begins. My wife loves these pictures because she says it looks like it's like a drug process. We're processing the drugs for the night to get ready to ship them out. But again, we get cleaned up, we delouse, we may or may not have dinner, but we have to clean and organize and process all that stuff that we've gotten. And when you've been on a trip with a bunch of people, it's a lot of stuff, but it's part of the trip. And again, everybody's pitching in. Somebody's recording the data. Somebody's making maps. We're cleaning. We're processing. We're divvying up amongst each of us. This was a local trip, so all this stuff is going to come back with us relatively easy. But it's part of the trip. It takes quite a bit of time, and you might be wet and tired and hungry, but you've got to do this before anything else takes place. Lots of cleaning, sorting. If we're lucky, we're in an Airbnb. Usually it's in a very small hotel room, and it's all consuming. There's bags and plants and bugs and mud in every corner of what we're doing. That's Scott on the right in a bathroom in Vietnam cleaning. I was in the tub cleaning on the other side of him. That's Andrew on the left, and you can see the bags all in front of him. The entire hotel room was full of plant material. The fun happens when you're doing international stuff and you've got to ship that stuff back, and all the permits that you've done and all the people that you've had to talk to try to make that happen. This is Peter Zale in Vietnam, and we had been there for 10 days collecting, got all the right paperwork, got to the place to mail it, and 500 degrees outside. As soon as we walked in, they shut the doors, they closed the windows, and they turned the AC off. I think that was intentional. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that was intentional. So we're dripping sweat. We're worried that things aren't going to go through. We're taping stuff. There were several trips back to the hotel to get paperwork that they said we didn't need, but we needed. It's very stressful when you're at this level, having to mail stuff in. That's why I like doing stuff locally better. You get to see parts of the country. You get to interact a lot more with local folks. It's a little bit easier to get stuff in, but just a handful of places I've been to, from Kentucky all through Alabama and Florida. Lots and lots of amazing places in the Southeast with diversity and amazing people that I've gotten to work with. That's Rhoda Maurer in the blue coat from Cornell, Todd Brownsville from the National Arboretum. We were in a particularly snaky part of Kentucky, and we made fun of them, and I think because they had those on, we didn't see any snakes. And those are chaps that they're wearing. A group of cast of characters in Kentucky, both professional and amateur horticulturalists and botanists that we continue to work with and do things with. We couldn't get in some of the places that we've gotten into to do this collection and conservation work without folks like that. And you stumble across some amazing things when you're out in the field, things that you wouldn't expect. This whole field of Sarracenia down in Florida, up and looking really, really pretty. And that was a grim trip. We were doing an assessment after Hurricane Michael on some magnolias and other endangered plants that got hit pretty hard. And you never know what you're going to come across walking through the mountains and the hills and hollers of the Southeast. Some kind of a logging truck, I think. But, that's what makes a good day and a good trip, is if you find that target thing, that species that's extremely threatened. This is Magnolia pyramidata, and you can see those seeds starting to hiss. This was a long trip through Georgia, Alabama, and into Mississippi. And the last day in the field, we didn't find anything until the last day in the field. And just on a whim, we drove down this power line where we had records of a herbarium specimen, and it was just red with seed pods all along the stretch of road. Very lucky to stumble across stuff like that. Gary Knox from the University of Florida, who's now retired, has done a lot of work with Magnolia pyramidata and Torreya. We spent a lot of time with him in Florida collecting and monitoring this endangered magnolia. An amazing place to botanize and collect plants. And this was on a survey after the Hurricane Michael had gone through. So as most things in life, you live and learn as you experience things. And this was a big trip. We started in Florida, the first of many Magnolia pyramidata trips that we did. And you can see, I think this guy's dead. All of our gear is on the ground. Every time we'd stop, it was hot. We got rained on a couple times. It was very buggy, lots of snakes. We saw lots of copperheads this morning, and we would sit stuff down. Little did we know at the time that it was the worst case of chiggers the three of us had ever encountered in our lives. This was just a part of us that we could photograph. We were literally covered from head to toe. Matt Lobdell from the Morton Arboretum doing the herbarium specimens, I look back in hindsight and we could see them like running along the paper and didn't realize what they were. I hadn't treated our clothing or anything, and this was the very first day. So we were covered, and we found out after the trip that Matt was allergic to mites, and that's what chiggers are, is a type of mite, and I've never seen anybody react like he did. So through the rest of the trip, we were itching and scratching, and we're taking Benadryl at night. Benadryl gives you crazy dreams. It was not enjoyable, and it was so incredibly hot, but lessons learned. After that, I always treated my clothing, and I've never had a problem since. And I mentioned scouting, living and learning. We figured out that if we went down when things were in flower, it's easier to see the flower. We could take GPS coordinates of the flower, and then we could come back in the fall and go straight to those plants and hopefully find seed and collect. So most of the trips that I've been on, we've done that, where you spend a shorter amount of time, you meet and you go in and you just scout and you find the stuff and you GPS it and then come back when there's more likely to be viable seed. And that was a huge lesson that we've passed on to other colleagues, but it works really, really well for us. So I mentioned collecting near, locally, and far, and there's lots more layers to going far, lots more hoops that you have to jump through. The aspect of flying. I want to say it was an 18-hour saga to get from Charlotte to Vietnam, and all the things in between, the food and just the travel and the wear and tear, and then knowing that you're going to have to do it back. And knowing when target species are gonna be able to do their thing. So this is Pinus kempfrii. This was on Scott McMahon's list of things to get, and we found them, but none of the cones were viable. So we spent a lot of time getting there, but part of doing the international trips are making those local connections so that you can continue to do those sorts of things. That's a huge part of that. And lots of perils that we wouldn't encounter here as you travel around a foreign country. The local livestock uses the same roadways that people do. It's kind of hard to see, but the moped that's in front of us there, the gentleman had 2 logs that encompass both lanes, so we couldn't get around him. And for whatever reason, the chainsaw that was on top of that was running also. I'm not quite sure. Maybe he was afraid if he turned it off, he couldn't get it started. But we spent a long time. And people drive differently there than they do here. I don't know how I didn't remain in a state of motion sickness, but that's just a small sampling of some of the stuff you encounter. And some of the places that we were in were way up in the northern parts of Vietnam, where there's still a lot of tribal communities, and you have to be very respectful of where you are and what you're doing. And we met with a lot of local officials and a lot of government officials, and it's all just part of navigating working there. But the payoff is pretty incredible. It's hard to get there. There's a lot of red tape to go through. The terrain was pretty hard to move around. The gentleman above me was clearing our path with a machete, and I would stop every once in a while to make sure he saw me, because he was getting very close with that machete on occasion. And I want to keep a hair that I have left. But that's pretty typical of some of the terrain that we were going through. But the payoff is pretty amazing. We were sweating it out and hustling and cussing up this trail, and Scott said, just stop and look behind you for just a second. And it was like, yeah, that's pretty amazing. My apocalypse now shot that Scott sent to me. This was a shed that was kind of halfway between where we were going. And on this trip, we didn't spend the night there, but on subsequent trips, you're in the field. It makes more sense to stay there, so you get a fresh start in the morning, and you're better using your time. But we had stopped there just to kind of refuel before we went on and leave some things that we didn't have to carry up with us. But we did spend a couple nights in and around that and on different trips. But again, it's some amazing places to look for plants, and I get very excited when I find magnolias. And this was a big one on our list. Didn't have any fruit, but this picture was for a magnolia colleague of ours, Dick Figler. We had been in contact with him about where this was and what to look for, and he was excited as I was when we sent him that picture. And lots of other kind of things that weren't on our list, but things that, this is Peter Zale from Longwood Gardens. He's a purveyor and lover of all things begonia, and Tony sold me on begonias years ago, and we found some amazing ones out there. I'm not sure if they made it through or not, but just the diversity and the size and the colors of some of these things, just amazing, amazing plant life. And the thing that, surprisingly enough, I get asked the most about with any of these travels, locally and abroad, but mostly abroad, is this particular question: is what did you eat when you were there? What sorts of things do you eat? And I'm the kind of person that I'll try anything once. I had a list of 2 things that I would not put in my mouth, but the rest of it I was game for. I learned that from Mark, God bless him. The very first international trip I went with Mark, he's like, do you have anything that you won't eat? I was like, well, there's some things. He's like, we're going to have everything in front of us. I'll try anything once. So we did. We ate some really good things, and we ate some really, really bad things. But pho on the right, that's what we had for breakfast every morning in Vietnam. Absolutely amazing. I'm not sure what the meat of the day was after a long day out in the field on the left. Lots of little shot glasses of some horrible moonshine that they made us drink. And I did the thing where I would put it to my mouth and sling it on the ground and sit my cup up. I did not partake. No, thank you. But I'm gonna take advantage of being someplace that I may never get to again. When you're in the field, it's completely different. One of the places we stayed, the purveyor of the hotel made us lunch every morning. It was glutinous rice wrapped in banana. And this is probably the 4th day of this, and you can see how much Peter's enjoying that. It gives you a lot of energy, but it doesn't taste like a whole lot, and it's pretty gooey. And on that wasn't a table, it was just some log that we flipped over because the bottom was flat. It was some kind of mystery meat that I stayed away from. You can take the boy out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the boy. As soon as we got checked into the airport, we went by a Burger King, and I was talking to Scott, and I looked, and he was gone, and I backtracked, and he had already gotten food and was sitting down eating some comfort food. And one last kind of group that we work with, Flora and Fauna International. Scott's made some really good inroads with this group. They typically do endangered wildlife, but the wildlife doesn't exist without the plant life that's around it. And he's kind of helped them realize that. So they've sponsored some of his trips and have helped with some things that he's done and will continue to do in the future. So part of the trip is, yes, you're out in the field, but we spent time visiting with them, talking to them, and just talking about the worth of this kind of collaboration and the importance of plant conservation. One of their big things were orchids. Peter is an expert in orchids, and that helps us to get to some other plants that are of interest and importance as well. But it's important to have those inroads with those kinds of collaborators. It's not all fun and games, contrary to popular belief. You're not traveling on your company's docket and living the life of Riley. Typically, when you're looking for seed, it's hot. I grew up in Alabama. And I don't know how I made it through all those hot summers, but the picture on the left, that's me literally walking out of the car, getting my pack out of the bag and taking the picture. It's super duper hot. We found these springs at this research area that Auburn University was taking care of, where we just laid down for a little while. The water was very, 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 very cold. It was nice after a hot day of chasing plants and running from snakes, but the weather's not always conducive. It's not always pretty. Remember this is always a thing. It's always going to be in my mind forever, and the importance of treating and preventing that sort of shenanigans. We spend a lot of time together, a lot of time driving. My first trip down, we drove from Mississippi all the way through Louisiana to Texas, and I thought I was going to lose my mind. And you do what you do to get by. The weather doesn't always cooperate. This is Torreya State Park, where Torreya is found, also Magnolia pyramidata and lots of other things. They took a direct hit from Hurricane Michael, and we did a survey of the plants that we had been working on, and they literally have Atlanta Botanic Garden has mapped every Torreya there, and we did a survey to check on a lot of those. We spent a whole day there just stumbling and falling through all the debris, and it's amazing. We went to the GPS coordinates, and there were the magnolias in flower. So we took notes. We reevaluated. We redid GPS, and they've since gone back to collect more seed off of those. The big concern with that is what kind of invasive species are going to come in and fill in that and maybe shade out some of those things. This, despite the best laid plans of mice and men, early morning departure from a hotel in Louisiana looking for Hamamelis ovalis, and hours of driving on these back roads, and we're almost to where we need to be. And that was a short day. We had to turn around and abandon ship, unfortunately. A lot of the land in Texas is privately owned, and they're not as keen on protecting plants as you would think. And when we were planning this trip looking for Hamamelis ovalis, we got a frantic call from one of our contacts that said they're cutting all the trees down. As she was walking, there were trees like falling all around her. So 2 days later, we went to help to try to salvage all along this corridor where they had clear cut were a whole row of Hamamelis ovalis of all different colors and flower sizes. And we actually dug up root cuttings to try to preserve those and collect them. There were more down in the area, but in the span of a day, they completely obliterated this huge population. Speaking of fun and games, this is how we're traveling everywhere. It's all of our gear for the field. It's all the stuff we're collecting, and it's all of our personal belongings, and all that stuff kinds of overlapped. And there's 4 grown men in that vehicle also traveling around bumpy Forest Service roads. It's not all glamour. And then there's the local flora and fauna to attend with. Everything's bigger in Texas. That's our good friend Jared Barnes' hand and his nursery. Great big grasshopper. It's not a real picture on the left, don't worry. Something to worry about when you're in the field. Again, not a real picture, getting a point across here. This was at a location in Florida, and as advertised, we saw a lot of copperheads that day. And they're kind of hard to see. This was on a scouting trip just below Mount Mitchell. I had stopped to take a picture behind me and saw the leaves moving between my feet, and this lovely was there. And I didn't realize it until I was looking at this with Tim. There's 2 of them there. That's another tail. So that's 30 miles from my car. That would have been a bad day. So it behooves you to pay attention. There's always things that you encounter. Some people are terrified. I think it's all kind of fascinating and cool. Did see these in Taiwan, have not seen them on any other trips, but that's always something to think about. What you're going to stumble across and unleash on your colleagues as you outrun them all. Yeah, I grew up with these, and most places that we've collected in the Southeast, they're all over our friends, the fire ants. But the icing on the cake, that what makes all this kind of worthwhile is when you get things home, you pass them around to your colleagues, you start growing and sowing, and things start to come up, and you have some success, and you see green and all those static cells that are popping up, and that's a good feeling that you've kind of done your due diligence to help preserve and spread that genetic diversity around. And even better when you see something that's kind of made it through the nursery industry and out into the world. This is a hydrangea that Dan had brought back from Vietnam, and after several past fails, we've got a bunch of them to grow. And this gentleman, Ethan Guthrie at Atlanta Botanic Garden, who's got a gigantic green thumb, kind of figured out how to get these things to make it. So who's next? What's on the list? As soon as I get done with everything here, we're doing a lot of work with Hemimelis ovalis. I started that in Charlotte, and I did some work on that last February, and we're hoping to go back. The missing piece of the puzzle is finding it in Louisiana. It's everywhere in between, but we haven't been able to find it there, and we'd like to. So we plan to go back. But looking at this from a conservation standpoint, and also maybe this might be a witch hazel to unleash to the nursery trade because the flower is so incredible. It's got a really interesting hairy leaf, and there's some different color variations that we found in that clear-cut site in Texas. Really reds, bright oranges, yellows and reds mixed together. I think they'd make some good potentials. So here we're digging up those. We found the stumps that have been driven over by the log skidders, and we dug up some root cuttings. And we had GPS coordinates from a previous trip, so we kind of knew who was who, and put that information in with the bags. And this is at the National Arboretum, where they've kind of lined them up into these trays to hopefully get them to grow. And they have. I don't know what kind of success they've had, but I hope to find out pretty soon. But we'll continue that. There's more work to be done with magnolias, and hope to do that in the not too distant future. I want to do more stuff in our mountains, and particularly after the unpleasantness of the hurricane that just went through. There's a lot of interesting things, and I think there's been some gaps in other gardens going through and looking for some stuff. There's some interesting things out there we'd like to do more work with. Linville Gorge is high on my list of places to do that in. I've seen some amazing witch hazels and mountain laurels and other things there that I think are worthy of getting from a conservation, diversity, and also maybe something to introduce into the nursery trade. And our friend Magnolia also. That's it, fast and furious. Time for questions, or jump into the next one? Yes, ma'am. So the question was, what's so special about the magnolia that I did work with? So Magnolia pyramidata is a red-listed endangered magnolia. It's one of the big leaf magnolias, and it's only found in a certain part of the southeast. Preserving it from that standpoint is, the conservation standpoint, and finding it in as many different locations as possible. A lot of what's been collected has been from Torreya and other places close by. So when we started doing the research for that, we looked at herbarium specimens that have been collected in different parts of the country. It's found in Texas. There were records of it in South Carolina, parts of Georgia. So we went to all those places looking for it so we could get that genetic diversity from all those different places. We had success. We had a lot of failures. We didn't find it, or we found it and there was no seed pods on it. And that's where, going back, Kevin Conrad, who works at the National Arboretum, he's kind of semi-retired. He will drive to some of these spots and go when they're in flower, take coordinates, and then we'll powwow together and say, hey, what week looks good when we think things are going to be producing seed pods, and we'll talk to people like Gary and people in the area that give us a better idea, and then we'll go back and collect that stuff. But the most important thing is preserving that endangered plant material and spreading it out to other gardens. And working with the American Public Garden Association, the Plant Collection Network, there's a whole host of linked magnolia collectors all throughout the country. And when we collect that stuff, if they're in the right zone to grow it, one of our partners is Green Bay Botanic, and I don't think they can grow pyramidata, but other gardens can, and we'll spread that germplasm around so that we don't have all our proverbial eggs in one basket. Did that answer it remotely? Okay. Yes, sir. The question was, there's a lot of national collection accreditation in England in particular, and we do have something similar here. That's what the Plant Collection Network is. It's governed through the American Public Garden Association. Pam Allenstein is the person that runs that program, and we have very strict curatorial guidelines that we have to have. You have to have a plant record system. You have to have a label system. You have to have a disaster plan, so if something happens at your garden, that's protected. You have to update your records at a regular interval. You have to have somebody dedicated to, somebody who is a plant recorder, curator. And, there are dues that you paid to do that as well. Once you jump through all those hoops, they have somebody that will check that accreditation and give you the sign off for that. What they're looking at now to kind of update it is reaccreditation. We've had our redbud and magnolia collection for a long time, and just because of staffing and time, we haven't done a lot with that. So I think they're looking at how do you be sure that all these places are still doing the right proper things. So there are pretty strict guidelines for that. Yes. The question was, do you use detailed geologic maps for some of your information? Absolutely. That's going to determine what's growing where. And that's not my area of expertise, but when you're in the field, you recognize that stuff. And that's something that we do look at really, really closely because and that's what we've looked at with Hemimelis ovalis, is it occurs in this particular region, and that region goes right through Louisiana. And we've had a really hard time finding it there. So you would think it would be there, but that's one of the many tools that we use to kind of help determine that sort of thing. Anybody else? Yes. Have we ever been inhibited by indigenous or other kind of national rights? Absolutely. And that's where I often get asked, well, I want to go do that. I want to go to these spots and get these plants. And we're going through all the right channels to make sure that we're not just going to collect stuff, because there's a lot of things like that in places like that. And some places you just can't. And that's just the way that it is. And we pay very close attention to those sorts of things. I personally haven't been on trips where that was a restriction. It certainly was in Vietnam. There were places that they weren't going to let us go because of things like that. And you have to be respectful of that. And that's why you build those relationships with those organizations and those government and local entities to be sure you're doing everything above board. We often have to have permits to go to some of these places, and you do that through the Forest Service or other kinds of groups. The USDA helped us with a lot of that. U.S. Forest Service did, and we do all that stuff before we go. And there's been places that we went where they're like, you can't collect here. It's like, okay, we'll try again next year, or we'll talk to somebody else. But that's a big part of the planning, is checking on all that stuff before you go, because you don't want to spend all that time and energy to go someplace and then you get turned around. One of the places we went to for the Hemimelis ovalis was a gigantic army base in Mississippi. It was the first place it was ever found, and we had to go through an enormous amount of red tape to get in there. And once we got in there, we drove to where we were supposed to go, and there was a road across that was barred off, and it had unexploded ordnance where we were supposed to go. So we had to go back to where we started, and somebody had to let us in that gate, and we had to watch an hour-long video on what it looked like and what we were supposed to do. So there's lots of that kind of stuff that's kind of sewn all through these trips. It makes it interesting, and these will be great stories for the grandkids one day. Yes. The question was the viability of plants. So it was a pine tree. It's got cones on it. And not only were the cones 300 feet up in the air, the ones that we had found on the ground and the ones that were low enough that we could get, the seeds had not completely formed. The embryos were incomplete. So there were cones there, but the seeds weren't. They hadn't finished doing what they were supposed to do. So if we had collected them, nothing would have come up. And some of them didn't have any seed in them. Either something got the seed out, we were too late, the timing wasn't quite right, and we were relying on some local research folk to tell us, this is when the window of opportunity is. So we made that decision months in advance, and it just so happened, we were 2, 3, 4 weeks too late, and everything's already in motion at that time. We can't change we had to get visas to go there, we had to get permits to go there, all the passport stuff. We couldn't just adjust our trip to when, right. all that stuff makes a huge difference. I've got colleagues that are working out west, and all the stuff with forest fires have just made their lives absolutely miserable. Government shutdowns. I was supposed to go on a trip with my colleagues from the National Arboretum, and they had a government shutdown. We had to cancel the whole trip, weeks before we were supposed to go. And we've already made hotel reservations, airline, rent-a-car, all that stuff. So it's a moving target. It'll take me to, in the field, we want something that's not gonna leak. And we have strong opinions on, Andrew will only use the name brand bags. Everybody has their opinion on which ones work well. So we'll collect within that. We'll write numbers on the outside with Sharpie and any information that we need. When we get back to process them, depending on what they are, we're putting them in paper bags. We're putting them in medium to dry them out.
They don't ship in those plastic bags.
Well, no. These, yeah, and on some of these trips, these two gentlemen from the National Arboretum drove all the way down from D.C. to Louisiana in a day, met me, spent the night in a hotel, and then we started the trip. So they took stuff straight back. They didn't have to ship anything. And most of what we did on that trip, because it was that time of the year and we're taking cuttings, we're not taking seed. These are rooted root suckers. We didn't need to dry them out. But I've been on other trips where we're cleaning stuff, and it's, we had coffee filters all over somebody's extra bed in their hotel room for seed to dry out that we had cleaned. Sometimes we'll bring seed dryers with us to dry stuff out.
Any vesicants?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on what we're trying to get. We've tried. There's every trick in the book.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any Magnolia pyramidata out in the nursery world to buy? I don't know. It's kind of fuzzy math with endangered species to get that kind of stuff. But I think the long-term goal with stuff like that is to get the populations up to where it could be. It's not the best-looking landscape plant in the world. Ashii is a better landscape plant, in my opinion. It's got a bigger flower. It flowers sooner. It kind of fills out better. It's easier to get. But that's not one of the ultimate goals with some of the conservation stuff. Hamamelis ovalis, which is potentially a new rare species, that I think has more potential to be something that could be introduced into the nursery world because it's a nice flowering plant. The question was germination protocol for the seeds. That's usually something that's kind of already, depending on what magnolias are fleshy. They're hard to seed bank, if not impossible. And the success rate is not super duper high, especially with some of the things that we're going after. So there's already a lot of protocols in place. Folks like Ethan Guthrie at Atlanta Botanic, who really knows how to propagate things. We'll get things that are typically hard and send them to somebody like him. I've got another colleague, Kevin Paris, who's proficient with magnolias and things like that. So we've got people that know those protocols and are good at that sort of thing. Those are the best things that we rely on to be sure that things are going to do well. Traditionally, there are some things that are just hard to propagate. Oaks are hard because you got to get the seed before they get on the ground because they'll get parasitized. And timing things right. Sometimes it's too late. Things are dried out or there just isn't a good population of things. And in shipping, it behooves you to kind of spread things out. I've had colleagues that have shipped. They've spent a lot of effort on one particular species, put it in one box. It gets to inspected when it hits here, and they find one insect in it, and all that gets incinerated. So that taught us put it in different boxes so that it doesn't all get destroyed. I think my time is up. Yeah. I knew I would go long. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Greg. Very interesting summary of plant hunting and the perils and pains and pleasures of it. So thanks very much. Our next speaker is Kaleb Goff, who's a doctoral student here at NC State University studying evolutionary ecology. Kaleb grew up in San Diego and completed an undergraduate degree in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of California in Santa Cruz. His NC State dissertation research is on climate change and its effects on high elevation alpine plants, particularly Erigeron. In the American West is where he's studying. And he brought today all the plants on the table left of what Tony brought, or on my right, are giveaways. And he wants you to take every one of them away because he's finished research on those plants and he doesn't need them anymore. He doesn't have space for them. So he's going to tell us about those plants today. So please welcome Kaleb Goff.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. This is a real treat. And thanks to Greg for a super engaging, just beautiful narrative about life and adventure and plants. I really appreciate that. Yeah, my name is Kaleb Goff. I'm a PhD candidate at NC State in the Plant Evolutionary Ecology Lab. I'm really excited and interested in alpine plants, mountain plants in general, and mountain biodiversity, but also in alpine plants. And have been working on this system, on this long-term data set about alpine plant community change over multiple decades, and linking that with rapid anthropogenic climate change. So, but today, sort of a lighter and more fun topic in some ways, and a plant giveaway, and so I'll get into that. Sorry, how does this? Yes, sorry, I was clicking it too many times. Thanks to Bobby for the introduction, but yeah, just wanted to show a few pictures sort of representing what I've done, at least since I graduated from UC Santa Cruz a decade or more ago. I was the Yosemite National Park park ranger and got to lead free walks and talks and programs as a ranger naturalist for people all around the world and take people into the alpine. And one of the things that kept happening, people asked me all kinds of great questions, and those questions would really sort of weigh on me, and I would think about them, and I would say, you know, I had an undergraduate research education. I should be able to go to the literature and get these people a good, you know, solid answer that comes from science. And it's sort of in relationship to how climate change is impacting alpine plant communities, particularly in that area in the Sierra Nevada. I couldn't find anything on multiple trips to Google Scholar and back. And I thought, it's probably me. Like, I'm not using the right search terms. Then I started to reach out to one of these people who are sort of in those fields, and they were like, no, we just don't know really anything about that. And so no one's published on this. And so that's kind of what my dissertation is based around. And then through that time, I also, part of that is to lead groups of people up to these mountain summits to do this protocol to study these plant communities. So this is from this summer in Great Basin National Park, me trying to sort of lead the show. These are all the data sheets. I've been a bit obsessed with Polemoniaceae for quite a while. That's a mountaintop endemic, Polemonium eximium. And lately I've been getting really excited about all things Asteraceae. This is Townsendia. It's amazing, endemic. And this project is just sort of one small spin-off of all that work. Oh, I went the wrong way. That's why it didn't work. So just want to say to you, naturalists and biogeographers and ecologists and evolutionary biologists for centuries have been celebrating mountains as places that are generating and maintaining biodiversity globally. There's this map, just wanted to show over here, of plant species richness in the alpine, so places above tree line. And you can see there's incredibly high species numbers, especially kind of in the central Andes, and then also in the place that we're going to talk about today in the American West. And this is because of heterogeneous mountain climates and these broad elevation gradients that sort of maintain and generate biodiversity. And you know, it's hard to get 600 species in the alpine in some of these regions without having sort of single site or single mountain range endemics. So just one of my favorites. I could put 1,000 plants, or I could put 100 plants in this square. But one of my favorites, Holsia vestida from Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park. So these are single site endemic asters, kind of closely related to Erigeron at least. So I'm going to show that, and I'll show some rare Erigerons in a second. There are two kind of broad conceptual models about how climate change is impacting alpine plant communities, or how it might be impacting alpine plant communities. The first is really intuitive, and it was proposed by Mark Urban and Emma Maris, and it's called the escalator to extinction. It's this idea that as things warm really rapidly, which is what's happening, that plants or birds or animals, that species track their climatic niches upslope to get to their sort of thermal optima, and that for species that are on top of mountain summits, with limited ability to sort of move across broad distances to other mountain summits, that we might see this kind of broad scale extinction and extirpation of species that are living on mountaintops because of climate change, because they can't track their thermal niches, and because they have a hard time dispersing. That's one model. We might expect alpine plant communities to be extremely vulnerable to climate change, like some of the most vulnerable communities on Earth. The alternative method, you got to have or the alternative conceptual model, and this is what makes science what science is people arguing about things, is this, and that's proposed by a really incredible alpine ecologist, Christian Korner from Switzerland, is this idea that the top of the mountain isn't the coldest place, right? And so this is just a photograph of a mountain in Switzerland. This is a thermal image. And so you can see from here, the colder colors are cooler temperatures, the warmer colors are warmer temperatures at the top of the mountain.
You're not speaking into the mic, people online.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Sorry. It's in my nature to gesticulate, but I'll keep it much more chill. Pardon me. That the top of the mountain isn't actually the coldest place and the bottom of the mountain isn't the warmest place, right? So on the bottom you can see, instead of those really nice climatic belts that maybe we kind of think of in a cartoon figure of what a mountain looks like or what an alpine, what the top of a mountain looks like, we really have this sort of heterogeneous soup of cold places and warm places. And so alpine plant communities might be sort of pre-adapted to warming or pre-adapted to these big changes because plant species can move just literally feet, right, from a warmer microclimate to a cooler microclimate. So two kind of contrasting ways to think about this. And my dissertation is sort of focused on thinking about which one of these holds up under empirical scrutiny or which one of these holds up to the data. I'll come back for an hour-long talk and tell you about that story later. We're going in a different direction. And that direction is to say that Erigeron, this genus that I've been sort of thinking about a lot, is everywhere and is under-celebrated. Just a quick data poll yesterday from iNaturalist, right? 500,000 observations of Erigeron globally, 300 species on iNaturalist. It's everywhere, partly because of some species that have really spread around the world. If you're familiar with, I think they're called brass buttons, Conzia, that's the sister genus to Erigeron, part of Asteraceae. We think there's 375 species in the world. And I really got excited about this one because they're especially diverse along elevation gradients. So you have just tons and tons of species as you drive upslope or as you walk upslope. You see this really nice kind of changing of species. You have like a lower elevation species and it mixes with the species just above it in elevation and then just above that and then just above that and then just above that, right? And thinking about this, and then I think the second thing that got me and for all of these plants is they inhabit some of the highest elevations in North America. So the third highest peak in North America, or the third highest peak in the continental United States is White Mountain Peak, which I work on a lot. And this plant is like on the summit at 14,200 feet. So that really got me excited about this. And I just want to, today we're going to follow, and these plants follow one particular sort of elevation biodiversity gradient. And so we'll follow that starting at relatively low elevations, kind of like around 6,000 or 7,000 feet and going up to these plants or this species that grows at 14,000. And the real connection to this, to the rest of my dissertation and to those conceptual models is to wonder if those plants that are on those mountain summits are actually thermal specialists, right? So our plants on mountain summits, can they actually only grow at super low temperatures, or do they actually only have high fitness and high performance at super low temperatures? Or do they sort of work, or are they there for another reason, right? So maybe they're poor competitors, or maybe there's some kind of biogeographical reason to find plants on summits that's outside of their temperature specialization. And Erigeron is a nice system for that, again, because you have all these species that are sort of stacked along elevation gradients. And so that's sort of the major question that drives this chapter, or drives this work. And for me to get at this, I wanted to collect seed from each of these. Erigeron has been grown a bit. Some of the species that I grew hadn't been grown before. But in ecology and in evolutionary biology, we're oftentimes looking for model systems. So plants that we know how to grow, we know exactly how to germinate them. We know what conditions they like. Maybe we even know their genome, things like that. So you can think about Arabidopsis, which is a brassica that's used in research a lot, or monkey flowers, right? Those are genera that we use for study a lot because we know lots about them. And something very exciting is trying to sort of cultivate and try to create a new model system. And so this is my attempt at that in Erigeron, to try to bring Erigeron to the scientific community, and then also bring it into cultivation and just sort of think about, can we grow these plants and can we use them to learn about temperature specialization? So to do that, I worked along this elevation gradient in Western North America, collected seed from populations that were at the upper elevation range edge and the lower elevation range edge from 6 species. And I try to put these in elevation order. So if you're hiking up the mountain down in the deserty pinyon, juniper, sagebrush, you see Erigeron aphanactus, and I'll go through each of these. Erigeron algidus is a little higher. I don't actually have that one today. Erigeron tenor, which is like just above that, so you're sort of getting up towards the tree line. And then Erigeron cloakii, which is just above that, just a little bit higher above that is its elevation range. And then Pygmaeus and Vagus, which are right on those mountain summits and not below that. So you have this nice kind of band of species. And then, yeah, last point I'll say here is I really appreciate Greg's points and just, you know, there's my permit numbers, right? When we go out, we do this stuff and we should hold each other accountable. And if you see someone, you know, you should ask them if they have a permit to do something, and that, you know, the collaboration with those land management agencies and doing things by the rules really, really matters. So there's my permit numbers, 3 collection years to do this thing. And then I've been working on this grow out pilot study at North Carolina State in the phytotron, sort of in kind of a little grow room on the side of the phytotron. I didn't have money for growth chambers to just try to see what temperature do these things germinate at? Can they grow at all? Can you transplant them? Will they survive enough to become mature plants? Will they flower? Sort of none of those really super basic things are known about these plants because they mostly haven't been grown. And we've answered some of those questions, but there's certainly some more interesting ones. Let me just go through a little bit of the methods for that. My friend and colleague, Michael Euler, who works at the Tilden Botanic Garden, I know he had an article in the Rock Garden Quarterly recently. Awesome person. He helped me kind of cook up this substrate medium, because another thing we didn't know about Erigeron is these Erigeron species is sort of what substrate to use. And there's, you know, from other rock plants or rock loving plants, you don't want to use just like a potting mix, or you might not want to use just like a potting mix. Michael Euler sort of counseled me to use this 3-part, just 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 organic peat, 1/3 expanded shale, which is that permatil stuff that people put in their lawns, but it's like a puffed rock substrate, and then 1/3 perlite. So that's what you'll see in these pots. That seemed to work pretty well. The seeds are super beautiful, and yeah, coin envelopes. We in this field, we have some very high-minded perspectives on which are the best coin envelopes. So containers are a beautiful and sacred thing. And then, yeah, I couldn't believe that. I really couldn't believe that these worked, and that we were able to grow these. And there's a nice photo on the right there. You can actually see the seed is stuck to the seedling. Asters have these achenes, which are these sort of winged seeds. And then I've actually, a bunch of people cautioned me not to use any fertilizer on these. And I, being a busy, rushed person, wanted these to grow faster, so they've been getting some liquid nutrients, which I think, yeah, caused them to grow a little taller. So let me just talk through each species that I have over here that I'm hoping to pass on to you. I'll just say, you know, I answered some of those questions, and yeah, you're doing me a huge service by taking some of these plants and just sort of seeing if they work. I think I've learned at least what I can from these plants, and have a sort of bigger seed collection that I'm going to work with back in the lab. So let me just talk through each species, kind of going up in elevation. 2,000 meters is about 6,000 feet if you're sort of confused by those units. But Erigeron aphanactus is the lowest elevation species that's over here. We can talk about them later. Rayless shaggy fleabane, these are all called fleabanes, the Erigerons. And it's sort of this desert dweller. So there it is in situ. I would imagine that the plants that I brought could look like that or sort of reach that. They're super hairy. They are rayless, so they just have the disc flowers. And at least from what I noticed, just cultivation notes, this species sort of became the largest, which is nice in the context of this hypothesis that plants from lower elevations can tolerate and sort of thrive in higher temperatures. So this is the lowest species. It got the biggest. It was growing in a fairly warm grow room. Erigeron tenor, which is a super, super special one, is a plant from, I guess, what I would call middle elevations, but it does get pretty high, and it does get up into the alpine. These are collected from the ancient bristlecone pine forest in the White Mountains in California. They have these amazing, delicate, thin stems, absolutely just beautiful graceful plant. And I'm super surprised this worked, partly because this is an edaphic endemic, meaning that this plant only grows on a given soil type. And that soil type are these dolomitic limestones, or these dolostones, which are metamorphosed carbonate limestones. So you can see that rock there. It's this beautiful white albedoed rock, which is also the rock type that the ancient bristlecone pine, the longest living organism on Earth, specializes on. So they kind of grow in there. So I'm surprised that this worked outside of a carbonate substrate. They're all in the same substrate. This one seems to be working fine. So I think that's a fun and strange thing to learn. Erigeron compositus, which has a super broad elevation distribution from 2,000 to 4,300 meters. It has these really highly dissected leaves. We think of it, at least from a perspective of an alpine plant, as being a bit weedy and cosmopolitan in sort of disturbed places and places where there are soil disturbance, so cryoturbation, where the soil like freezes and puffs up and then comes down. Erigeron compositus does well in those habitats in the alpine. And yeah, you'll see some of the growth forms over here. They're really compressed in the ones that I grew, which I'm a bit surprised by. And I'll be interested to hear sort of if these propagate vegetatively when you try them out. And then Erigeron cloakii, variety Pinsleyae. Variety cloakii is from Charleston Mountains in the Vegas area. But this is one that's a bit more common. Upper middle elevation, these amazing kind of arcing, like curved stems. Up where I work, this species is fairly common, especially again on those dolostones. So you can see those white rocks behind, but also on more silicate substrates. So I'll be interested to hear about this. It didn't do as well as I thought, given how sort of locally common it is in the places where it was collected from. And then getting up to the real stars of the show, the sort of alpine endemics, Erigeron pygmaeus, which is really only found above 3,000 meters, so really only found above tree line. This pygmy species is this high elevation specialist, and yeah, it didn't produce. I didn't make plants that looked like this growing them. They got really long and leggy and weird. And it's probably a response to too high temperature and not liking that fertilizer. So I'll be interested to hear how they do and what happens to them. Would love to see a flower on one in the wild too, or in where we work. There's this amazing kind of difference in floral ray color. So you can see there's these really light rays and these really dark purple rays. No one has any idea why, or flower color is important for a whole bunch of things. So I don't think many people are aware of that. That's an exciting one. And then lastly, the sort of crown jewel, one of the ones I'm most excited about, this plant that grows, one of the highest growing species in North America, Erigeron vagus. A few did grow, and excited to see that. And it's a species that really is a mountaintop specialist and oftentimes forms these amazing mats kind of stuck into rock crevices. I actually found out on accident that this plant was fairly sensitive to germination temperature. I sowed a bunch and I didn't have a lot of temperature control over the place that I was growing these in. I accidentally lowered the temperature in that room. Like I went over to the little air box and I turned it down a bunch before spring break last year. And I came back and a bunch of these had germinated. So I sort of accidentally discovered that whatever the germination temperature I was using, like 72 or 73 degrees Fahrenheit, that if I dropped it by 8, I would get sort of a doubling of, by 8 degrees Fahrenheit, I'd get sort of a doubling of germination. So at least some evidence, very sort of anecdotal evidence that plants from super high elevations might be sensitive to germination temperature. So thanks so much. Thanks for taking these plants from me. Thanks for being exciting. I'll be back. I hope to give a little longer talk and to go into things in some more detail, and I'll be excited to chat and get your questions. So thanks so much. Feel free to email me. Want me to take questions here?
Yes.
Okay. Hi.
Is your contact information on the plants?
Yep, my contact's right here.
Okay.
I got like so many emails now, so either of these will get me.
Is it on the plant itself?
It's not on the plane itself, but yeah, I can give it to you. Yeah, feel free to send me an email. Love to write some responses. Yeah. Yeah, great question. The question is, what are you doing at NC State studying alpine plants? Yeah, it would be a beautiful thing if that's the way that it worked in research and in science, that you sort of had this deep geographic proximity, but it's just not the way that it works. People take jobs where they can get jobs. And it's really common, like lots of people at NC State work in South America and around the world, in China, right? There's an amazing dogwood expert at NC State that works in China a lot. So that's just, that's the roll of the dice. Yeah, I came to NC State to work with Dr. Seema Sheth, who is the science director for the nonprofit that monitors all these summits, and the rest is history. That's how I got here. So yeah, I came here just to work with her because she's such an amazing expert. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the question is just like, how do you start growing plants that are supposed to be alpine plants in North Carolina? And the question is like, I don't know. And that's sort of the impetus behind this project is to sort of test out some of these things, right? So you try to, I thought from what I had read, or from the little that I had read, that the substrate would be important, right? That if I use some like really heavy organic matter, kind of thick substrate, that wouldn't work. And so I tried to use the substrate that's really airy and rocky. I thought that would be helpful. I try to grow these at a lower-ish temperature, but partly wanted to say that at least in these XC2 conditions, that even plants from mountain summits, they have a lot of plasticity in the growing temperature that they can live at. And so that's one kind of piece of evidence towards this idea that alpine plants might not be temperature specialists. They might be specialists in some other axis of their niche. So yeah, this is literally a project of trial and error. I sat down with your exact question, and I'm still not sure I've answered it. I think trial and error, right? A lot of these things, even some of the greatest horticulturalists, right, in our sort of record, they just tried things out they thought would work. Yeah, I think someone asked Greg that, and yeah, the answer is sort of just like black magic. Like there's a guy in the back that's done a lot of trial and error. Yeah, totally. Yeah, just witchcraft and wizardry, right? You're just like, I think this might work. It doesn't. You move on to something else, and a lot of these protocols, right? So I think, yeah, another way I could have done this is to really try to isolate those growing conditions and figure out at which ones. And I think that'd be a nice follow-up experiment to this. This was just the like crazy style, can this work at all? And I think the next is a real tight controls on watering, real tight controls on temperature conditions. That's a nice sort of future direction for this. Yeah, my advisor, look up my advisor. Her name's Dr. Seema Sheth. She studies evolutionary ecology. She's worked a lot on monkey flowers in the Western US. She works on Chamaecrista here in the East Coast. And yeah, she did a PhD or a postdoc at Berkeley and got involved in all this mountaintop work. She mostly does like demography and plant population type work, but is a wonderful person to talk to about community ecology as well. And my advisor is sort of more of a scientist, like is interested in the questions and then wants to find the model systems to best answer those questions. And so that's another reason why a lot of times people are working somewhere that's far away from their study site, because they've sort of selected that model system as a way to best answer this question. So one of the questions our lab's most interested in, or my advisor's most interested in, is whether evolution can rescue plants from climate change. So can plants adapt fast enough in the face of climate change? So yeah, look her up. She's got some awesome talks out there and has done all this amazing work. Cool. Thanks, everybody.